Welcome back to Eatsy, where if we can make steamed noodles, then so can you. Normally I get my husband to help me out with some sort of like a little blurb or educational thing at the start of our videos, but this time I'm not going to do that. Because of all the dishes that Auntie makes for us, this dish is my absolute favorite that she makes. I am literally that Parks and Rec meme whenever Auntie makes these for us. So folks, slap that like button, punch the subscription button right in the face, and don't go through your lives without trying these noodles. Or mian mian as they're known in Chinese. Bear in mind that the ratios for this recipe are quite large because we always enjoy making leftovers when we have this dish. This dish is also 100% vegetarian so long as you don't include any meat. So let's address that right away. In our dish we use about 200 grams or 7 ounces of finely cut pork like this. The idea is to have about 50 grams per person. We were serving 4 people, so that's 50 grams per person, so 200 grams. Just because this isn't a meat dish, it's a noodle dish, and the pork would just be there for a little bit of flavor. So if you want your noodles to be vegetarian, simple enough, just ignore us whenever we start talking about the pork. If you don't want to make your own noodles, you can get noodles like these from your local Asian markets. So because we're making a lot of noodles, we're starting with 600 grams or 21 ounces of flour in a bowl. To that 600 grams, we're going to be adding 270 grams of water, or 9.5 ounces. This is a ratio of 45% flour to water. So that means take your 600 grams times by 0.45 is 270 grams. So if you wanted to half our recipe, you would take 300 grams of flour times it by 0.45, which would be 135 grams of water. So regardless of how many noodles you want to make, just take your weight of your flour, times it by 0.45, and use that much water. And your water doesn't need to be warm, it can just be room temperature. Slowly add your water to your flour, kneading it together as you go. Continue rolling and kneading until you form your dough into a ball. Then cover it with a lid while we prepare the rest of the ingredients. Ideally, you'll let your dough rest for at least half an hour. So now let's take a look at the vegetables. Auntie says that when she makes her noodles, she tries to make it 50-50 noodles and vegetables. Here we're using 2 medium tomatoes, about 1/4 of a cabbage, and 2 medium Yukon Gold potatoes. Below that is about 2 handfuls of green beans. You'll see down here at the bottom is a slice of ginger, about 5 cloves of garlic, and some thick parts of some green onions. These are all going to be diced together and added in with the pork when we cook it. First thing we're going to do for vegetable preparation is to take the nibs off both ends of the green beans. Then, either using a knife or a pair of kitchen scissors, we're going to cut the beans in half. Here Auntie is explaining that you don't want to cut your beans along the seam of the beans, instead you want to cut the fat body part straight in half. Then take your sliced bean and cut the length in half. Now let's do the taters. Potatoes. After you peel your potatoes, you're going to want to cut them into slices, and then slice those slices again to make chubby French fry shapes. Then let's move on to the cabbage. You'll want to cut it just like as if you were making coleslaw, in long, thin slices. It will cook down quite a bit in the steaming process, so they don't have to be too fine. For your tomatoes, you want to slice them into casual chunks. Like the cabbage, the tomatoes are basically going to be disintegrated away by the time the cooking process is over. They add a bit more moisture to the noodles and a little bit of color, but as Auntie was slicing them here, she was explaining to us that they're optional, and if you don't have tomatoes, then don't worry about it. And here are our flavor veggies. As mentioned previously, we just have 2 chunky parts of 2 green onions, 4 or 5 cloves of garlic, and 1 generous slice of ginger. We're going to take all 3 of those and dice them up. With the veggies done, now we're going to head back to the dough. And we're going to witness the mad noodle making skills that Auntie and Uncle have. They wrangled this entire ball of dough into a massive pile of noodles, so by all means cut your dough ball into smaller pieces to make it more manageable for you. On a floured surface, just use a rolling pin and start rolling your dough out. And keep rolling it out, and then roll it out some more, and then rolling it out some more. Your goal is to make your pasta about the same thickness as an Alfredo noodle. By this point, Auntie and Uncle have whipped out their giant 2-foot-long rolling pin to continue with their noodle making journey. What they're doing here is pushing out along the length of the pin at the same time as they're pressing it down onto the counter. make sure that if your dough starts to stick to itself at any point, put some more flour on it. And eventually they got it looking like this. I didn't even know how to film this and I had to lift the camera way up over the counter to get it all. This is what I mean when I said cut your ball into smaller pieces so that you don't end up with something like this. At this point, Auntie wanted it a little bit thinner, but it was too big for her to work with anymore. So she bundled it up, cut it in half, and then put half of it back on the rolling pin again, just to get it a little thinner. Once again, we're aiming for Alfredo noodle thickness. When Auntie finally got it how she wanted it, she lightly floured it again, and then rolled it back up across the rolling pin. Then you're going to grab a knife and cut the dough off the rolling pin along the length of the pin. You'll then have a pile of sheets of uncut pasta. They look kind of like sheets of paper stacked on top of each other. Then, starting at one end, we're going to slice them into noodles. Then you fluff them all up so that they're not folded over each other and set them aside in a bowl. Then Auntie's going to do the same thing with her other sheet of dough. Roll it back over the rolling pin, lightly flouring as you go, slice it off the rolling pin, and then cut them all into actual noodles. Now let's head over to the stove where you can hit the like and subscribe buttons. The pan you're going to want to use is either a pan with really high edges or a large wok. You're going to make sure that it's lightly oiled over medium to high heat. Uncle firstly added this little bit of chili pepper just to make it a little zingier. But if you don't want zingy, feel free to skip that step. Next into the pan, you're going to toss your pork, as well as your green onions, your garlic, and your ginger. And of course, if you're making this a vegetarian dish, just omit the pork. You're going to want to cook all that together until your pork starts to brown. Then toss in your tomatoes. Next, we're going to add in 1 tablespoon of light soy sauce. Then a quick blurb, or about 1 teaspoon of dark soy sauce just for color. The first veggies we're going to put in then are the potatoes and the beans, because they take a little bit longer to cook. With your potatoes and beans in there, we're going to add another tablespoon of light soy sauce. And as well, a 2nd teaspoon of dark soy sauce. Then you can start putting in your cabbage. Depending on the size of your pan, you might need to let the cabbage cook down a little bit to get it all to fit in there. When you've got all the cabbage in your pan, you're going to add 1.5 teaspoons of salt. Give your vegetables a good stir to make sure that they're thoroughly mixed. Now we're going to add water to it so that it will steam the noodles. Add enough water so that it starts to peak up past the vegetables like this here. When the water comes up to a boil, you can start adding in your noodles. Try to place them as an even blanket over top of all your vegetables. Once your water is boiling and you've got all your noodles in there, cover it with a lid, turn the heat down to low, and let it steam for about 20 minutes. After those 20 minutes or so, grab your chopsticks or utensil of choice and gently start pulling the noodles around.
Wow. Wow.
When you fluff your noodles, you want to look around and see if you find any that are stuck together like this. If you do, you want to gently break them apart. When you found that your noodles are all fluffy and not sticking together, then you can start stirring them into the vegetables. It helps to use a spatula to scoop some of the vegetables from the bottom and pull them up onto the top. When it's all thoroughly mixed, then you can start pulling it out of the pan and putting it in your serving bowl. As you can see here, we got lots of leftovers that are still in the pan, even though our serving bowl is going to be completely full. This is a big recipe, so if you need to, make sure you reduce your ingredients accordingly. And there you have it, steamed noodles, or mian as they're known in Chinese. This is one of those dishes that looks far more complicated to create than it actually is, so it's a good way to impress guests if you have people over. If you liked this video, please consider giving it a like. Also, let us know down in the comments if you enjoyed noodle recipes and if you tried this one out for yourself and how it turned out for you. Lastly, it would mean a great deal to us if you could give that subscription button a click. And as always, thank you so much for watching.